live, and we actually don't have an introductory slideshow, so we're just going to jump right in. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the CCA Living Room. My name is Jason Silverman. I am the Cinematech Director here at the CCA, and very grateful to be back with you guys. As you can see, I'm in our studio theater, and it's empty and lonely without all of you, so I hope sometime when it's safe, we'll all be back here together. Looking forward to watching movies with you again and talking about them, because it's a really important thing to do right now, is to hear different kinds of stories from outside of the mainstream and to expand our minds with all the information that we're not seeing on the corporate news. And a great example of storytelling from outside is And She Could Be Next, which I hope you guys got a chance to watch. We were all crying. We had our rehearsal. We're talking about it. We were all crying during it because it's so incredibly inspiring and maddening at the same time, and essential. And we've built what I think is a really wonderful panel to talk about the issues that it brings up. Before we start, though, I want to let you know that the living room is, we've made it for most programs free of charge, so we can have more participation, and money will be no object. If you do love what we're doing, please feel free to support us financially. Pay for a living room program if you like. And to do that, I'm going to just start this offer here. There is an offer now in your sidebar. If you clicked on Donate Now, it'll open in a new window. You don't have to interrupt your enjoyment of this program. You can just wait till after it's done. It'll still be there for you to contribute to the CCA and keep us strong during the pandemic. And before we introduce the panelists, I'm going to try something unusual, and hopefully we can get this to work. We've got Janet Williams with us here on the FaceTime, and we're going to see if we can get her on the screen here. Just a second, and hear her too, because we're having all kinds of technical problems. Janet is like, we have a curse with Janet. Janet, can you speak and say hello? Are you saying hello? Janet? Can you hear us? Hold on a second. There's Michael. We really want this to work. Hold on a second. No, we can't hear you again. This is like a comedy routine with us and the Now leadership. Every program we've done with them, we try to get them to say hello, and we have one problem or another. I will put words into Janet's mouth and say that we're incredibly grateful for all the participation that Now does, and for our partnership with them. This is an essential time to be engaged with the kind of work they do. I don't know the time of their next meeting, unfortunately, but go to their website and it'll tell you everything. And thank you, Janet and Dana, who's the head of the film committee, and for everyone at Now who keeps this vital conversation going. Bye, Janet. Welcome to 2020, everybody. Our panel tonight, we're going to start with the wonderful Kate Noble, who is the president of the Santa Fe Board of Education, representing District 3. She was born in Santa Fe, was educated in the Santa Fe public schools, studied film at Columbia University, and then spent a decade or more at the BBC as a producer, reporter, and anchor. So we're kind of hitting above our weight here in terms of moderators. And she is the Vice President of Policy and Stakeholder Engagement at the New Mexico Early Development Partnership. And she's been focused on growing local businesses and encouraging young people in the business world here in Santa Fe for years. We're very grateful to have you here tonight, Kate, for all that you do for Santa Fe. We have our dear friend, Andrea Romero, Representative Andrea Romero, who represents District 46, which is most of Santa Fe. She is a 17th generation Northern New Mexican. She's born and raised in Santa Fe, Espanola, Chamayo, La Masia, and Nambe. She has stories to tell about that if you can ever corner her. She graduated from Stanford University with a degree of political science. She's not done being educated yet. She might talk about that tonight. And has worked As an entrepreneur and a supporter of businesses and individuals, she's a huge supporter of the arts too. We're really grateful to have you here, Representative. Thank you. And Marjan Safinia is the producer and director of the wonderful And She Could Be Next. She is an Iranian documentary filmmaker whose films examine identity, community, and social justice. Look her up on Internet Movie Database. She has a bunch of wonderful films to see. She's also served as president of the board of directors of the International Documentary Association, which is, for those of you who don't know, is a major force in the documentary world. She serves on the board of directors of Chicken and Egg Pictures, which supports women filmmakers, and is a member of the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences. Thank you, Marjan, for being here.
I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Great. And Kate, I'm going to turn it over to you, and I'm going to get out of the way.
Thank you, Jason. And it's really great to be here. I'm so excited to talk to these two incredible women, and having watched this amazing film. It's really, I think I cried through the first part and cursed through the second.
Sounds right.
Yeah. So, Marjan, let's, first of all, congratulations on this incredible product. I mean, the question really is, why did you choose to make this film? But let me frame it in, tell us about the title, And She Could Be Next. Why is that the title?
Okay, so there's a couple of big dirty secrets. One is that titles are the hardest part of filmmaking. They're impossible to get right. And so it was the first thing we wrote down, and we never managed to come up with a better one. That's reason one. Reason two is there's an and on the front, so that we always come at the front of any listing in the A's, because, we all learned that from Wile E. Coyote. Because it's not a done deal. It's not a foregone conclusion, right? There is a conditional could. A lot of people have said this should be, she will be next. And while I certainly hope that to be true, we know that there's lots of impediments and forces at play that don't really want to see women of color in leadership. And so the could is related to that. I don't know if that answers the larger question about why we made it, but it answers the title
Why did
question.
you make it? But go ahead with the larger one.
Well, I mean, listen, we're in a very rapidly shifting moment in this country, and I'm not talking about the insane moment in which we find ourselves in this very second, but from a demographics perspective, the country is changing really, really quickly, right? And we're on track to be a majority minority country in, some people say 2040, 2042, in the next generation. And in our youngest generation, youngest voting bloc, in fact, at this point, is already a majority not white population. And yet, when we look at our leadership, it's very much out of balance. So it's predominantly white, predominantly male. I will say that this morning I read an extraordinary new report from the Reflective Democracy Project. And one of the stats that just blew my mind is that from 2012 to 2020, there has been a 184% increase in women of color running for Congress, which is in and of itself, that's the whole could be next, right? And loads more interesting stats. If people are into stats, it's at wholeads.us. So in this moment where there's such a gulf between our elected representatives and what our communities, not just what they look like, but what their lived experiences are, right? It felt like a story that needed to be told while we've been doing nothing but ingesting politics the last 4 years. The eye has not been on this ball, right? We still are talking about the wrong things, in my humble opinion. And so we wanted to sort of explore this moment in the wake of the external forces of politics, which are, for many of us, keep us up at night, right? Like they're, from a policy perspective, things that we find unconscionable are happening in this country. And so it's this kind of collision of these forces happening at the same time in the year 2018, which is the backdrop to our story, although our story is not really a campaign film, right? It's really a story about a movement of women of color claiming political power. And the last thing I'll say, and then I'll let you get another question in, is that we are all the new American majority, that we talk about in this film, or in this series. So our entire crew, our team, we're all people of color, immigrants, queer folk, trans folk, like people from every kind of other And so we made the film that we want to see, right? We told the political story that centers race and gender, that we want to see, and we want to see ourselves represented in power and in brilliance and in strategy, and not in the victim stories, which are all too common when you see documentaries about communities of color.
Hallelujah. And as somebody who literally decided to run for office on the day after the last presidential election, and I have to say, I was incredibly happy when my friend Andrea Romero said she was going to run for office. And now, I get to vote for her, but she's my representative in New Mexico and has been there about 2 years, her first term, and has wildly blown away mine and everybody else's expectations because she is so good at this. And it's so hard. We have a volunteer legislature, one of the only ones in the country. She doesn't get paid. Andrea, why did you decide to join this movement? And were you aware you were joining a movement when you first made that decision?
That's exactly the question I think so many women go back to, and especially seeing this film. If you ran for office after, the last presidential election, it was precisely that moment that everyone was terrified. I think in that situation where it was like, what do you do? And that sort of hopelessness that came with that situation. And thankfully, we have people in our community like Kate Noble, who was like, already leading the charge and stepping up and doing these things immediately, while I had to ask her and sort of, question who does this job and how are you even meant to understand who is in charge here? And I think that's what's so terrifying about running for office is that you don't necessarily know the navigational points of if you were deciding to do that. Who do you ask? Who do you talk to? And Kate was actually one of those people where I was like, I'm thinking about this. And she literally jumped for joy. And I was absolutely mortified because I was like, that's the absolute wrong response, right? You want somebody to like humble you and you think that it's humbling that you need. And I don't know if that's what women go through, but just like somebody to tell you, no, this is not a good idea, so that you don't have to face the facts of what's going on in your own community and what ownership we take over that. And I, you don't have a roadmap for any of this, and especially running for office, and the differences between campaigning and the realities of what happens after the fact. And I think it's easier when you know somebody who's done it, but for so many women who have picked up and just literally said, it's time and we've got to do this now, no time like the present. It's that reinforcement and that sort of system of people that you invent. You don't know what your supports are. You don't know where your inspiration will come from. And yet every step of the way, as you make it through every hurdle and play whack-a-mole with, the different problems of the day, in any political situation, you see those glimpses of hope. And thankfully, in the last 2 years in serving in office, it's like this reawakening in all of the opportunity that you see in a place. And I'm so grateful to have been a part of that movement. Now looking back, you didn't know. We had no clue. We had no clue. We had heard like inklings that this was a new thing. But it feels very, very isolating. It feels very terrifying going through that whole process on your own. And it's so amazing to see the stories that you're able to capture in this film of those moments where you're just like, what is happening? What is happening in the world today? So thank you for doing that. I just adored the film because I think it captured so much of that emotion that we're afraid to really even express in these situations, where that vulnerability is so real. So Kate knows that, I know that it's so real and awful and terrifying. But at the end of the day, you know why you stand up for what you believe in. And this group above all knows those reasons. So I just, feel so honored to be part of this and this now movement. But this film totally encapsulated that feeling. So thank you for for doing that. And I share that. I share those emotions.
That's
so.
very on the other end, that's very, very gratifying to hear, because we all need to be seen, right? And I'm just grateful that you ran for office, because it does take women. You have to be asked many more times as a woman to actually do it, and to believe that you're the right person to do it, many, many more times than, I don't have the statistic. I can make one up, but you could probably put it together. You know, men will jump in at the suggestion that they were powerful and, you know, good for office, whereas women really need to be convinced. And I think half the head game for women, especially women of color, is allowing yourself to believe it when those people tell you that.
And that was something I want to talk about Emerge New Mexico so much. I'm sure you know about Emerge, Marjan, nationally, and our New Mexico chapter is really good. I also want to get to a clip of the film. But that was one of the things they literally teach us. And Andrea and I are both Emergistas and alumni of the program in New Mexico. But they tell you, you know, women, they have the statistic about how many more times women have to be asked. And, you know, part of what it does is form a support network and teach us about layers of privilege and intersectionality, which is some of what I think we should get to next. But let's take a pause for the film and a moment that sort of looks at that. And so many of these are layered moments, but looking at Stacey Abrams in the church, if we can go ahead and play that film clip, Jason.
You know, everyone is watching one of the closest races for governor that Georgia has ever had. How does it feel for you to be the woman that is in it? I mean, really in it, in a way that a lot of us don't really understand because we have never been in your shoes.
Well, as the first Black woman to ever be a nominee, there has not been anyone in my shoes before. So welcome, y'all. Y'all are welcome to stand with me. But here's the thing. There is a great deal that's been made of the fact that my winning the nomination and my eventual election will create history for America. I'll be the first Black woman in American history to stand as governor in any state in our nation's history. But what I say is, look, I don't want anyone to elect me because I'm Black. I don't want anyone to elect me because I'm a woman, but I want you to know that as a Black woman, the things that I've had to accomplish to be positioned for this race are skills that I will bring to the job of being governor. Being underestimated, having to navigate spaces where we are not expected to be, being able to see challenges where other people don't understand them, knowing how to overcome barriers, being able to identify that there were actual barriers. But I want to be the first, I don't want to be the last. What we should be working for is making certain that everyone has the freedom and the opportunity to do what they want and to be who they are without these artificial barriers created by voter suppression and by pushing out communities and by siphoning off resources. And this is a very long way of saying to you, it feels good. It feels good to be in a dead heat with a Republican in Georgia. That means we're winning, actually.
So Marjan, that to me is a pretty succinct thing about intersectionality, and even the advantage of the skills of, you know, all of the things that Stacey Abrams unpacks there. I'm wondering, in doing this, where did you end up on that? How are you thinking about these different forces of privilege, or as they talked about it in Emerge, oppression, that link up and in particular are present for women of color?
Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the things that we found, you set out as a documentary filmmaker with an idea, like some kind of thesis in your head, and then you get out in the world and either it goes how you planned, or more often it doesn't go like you planned at all, and you adapt, not unlike politics and running for office. But I think that one of the things that was really transformative, or has become really transformative, is this idea of intersectional movement, right? That this country has been entrenched in black and white issues forever, right? And obviously what we've lived through this year, there's no question that black Black bodies in America are treated differently than any other kind of bodies, and that is incredibly important to hold front and center. But at the same time, it is true that when our communities of color across the diversity spectrum kind of link arms and understand that we have many causes in common, that new dynamic of power, of people working together across groups, is really transformative. And so there's that kind of big level intersectionality. And then, the reason that we wanted to focus on women of color is because women of color live multiple identities at all times, right? In everything that they do. So they are women, they are people of color, they may be immigrants, they may be mothers, they may be workers, they may be, there's like an intersectional lens that you can't put down when you live the experience of a woman of color. And it's that lived experience, or it's that multiple lens which you can apply to any decision that comes across your table, that helps you see things in a new way. There's a line that Stacey says in the film, which is, when you change the face of leadership, you change what leadership sees. And I think in its most boiled down way, that's what matters, right? And this is not a call to like eradicate all white men from power. We need their voices too, right? But we just need a diversity of voices and a diversity of lenses through which they interpret the world. And if the goal of legislation is to create a playing field where everyone can thrive, well, we've been missing some really, really important voices. And it's not a learned thing, it's a lived thing.
I would say, again, my representative, has been a voice for those who are marginalized and to lift up. And Andrea, I think about you as a woman of color who is much younger than most of the folks in our legislature. Nobody would look at you funny if you were your age and a man. But, again, intersection of factors. How do you handle leadership and getting things done and being that person that shoulders the responsibility both visibly to younger women of color, children out there who are growing up and seeing you, but also just in getting the legislation passed and the policies and in stepping into the power in our roundhouse? How do you do that?
Yeah, it's actually quite funny, because I think my first session was really just establishing understanding that we belong in the building. I think it was so odd for people to see young people participating, number one, and then to be defending legislation and led into rooms where we had to let folks know, like, we belong here. Often it was, on the Senate floor, even our House membership had to understand that there were so many new faces and so many younger faces. And I do happen to be the youngest member of our legislature now, which I didn't even know that coming into it. I was the first woman to ever run for office in the seat that I hold now, and now I'm the youngest person in the legislature. So those are statistics that you don't think about. I think in the same way that I think Stacey Abrams is like, I just want to be here because I want to create change. And then you end up holding positions that you're not aware of in even in your own body that you're having to navigate through. And I think that for me, it was just that I wasn't expecting so much, having been in, academia, having been in different situations in the international space, and coming back to New Mexico, where we are the majority, even as minorities, but in a position of power. It is a totally different situation when we're having to navigate how to speak to folks and how they're taking you. And I think for the first time, I wasn't realizing that. And I think there was this sort of back and forth on this mind your elders situation, often that I was thinking was political, but so much of it was so social, was so much about that situation. And you figure out how to do that. And so much of the time too, because there was such a big blue wave and we weren't expecting to have the ability to really move legislation forward, that it was uncharted territory for lots of folks. So we were actually inventing ways of moving through these new systems that we actually created new culture in our side of the chamber. That was actively something that folks were talking about that was so different In particular, in contrast to our Senate side, which had, they hadn't gone through the same wave of elections that we had. There are 4-year terms. So we're going to see a lot of different movement moving forward, but literally the culture had changed in how people spoke to each other, the respect, the time, even the way that the rules were enforced more in a more solid way about giving everybody equal time to speak, and whoever was speaking. It was just so different. And it was just kind of magical for us, because for me, it's like just setting the tone moving forward. And yet this is sort of the platform now that we have moving forward, that this is what the legislature looks like. This is what leadership looks like. And this is actually where our voice is. And I think that was unexpected for me, but at the same time, we are in uncharted waters, which is actually so magical and wonderful to have that right at home, and to be part of that is just nothing short of spectacular.
Do you consciously think about being fearless, acting fearless, behaving fearless?
I honestly don't, because I think that's what's so hilarious. And like for me, in the comic, relief that I try to get out of this ridiculous situation that we're in trying to do this, there's so much to do from my perspective. Like there's just so much going on. There's so much need. There's so many ways for us to be able to find a place for us to assert the needs and address them politically and in policy, that there's just no time to sort of waste. And thankfully I grew up in this culture where that's really where we are and where we were, that you just have to go in and get things done. And that's fortunately how you just navigate it. It's you don't think about that at all.
And Marjan, did you see commonalities? I mean, there's a little bit, you have to have some dynamism to be a politician, but did you see commonality amongst the women that you covered in the film as to how they deal with that, whether it's the fear or the active exclusion? We saw some of that, but what are some of the top tips as to how this works for women of color stepping into power?
Yeah, I think there were a lot of commonalities, and even hearing Andrea talk a little bit earlier about seeing herself reflected in these other women's stories. I mean, honestly, there were commonalities between the 19-year-old at the time, Bushra Amiwala in Skokie, Illinois, and Stacey Abrams running for governor of Georgia. There were commonalities in those experiences. I mean, I think the most common thing, well, first of all, is like raising money. That is not a joke. As you all know, having gone through Emerge training and ran for office, you need money to win in politics. And it is incredibly difficult for women of color to raise money, especially if you come from cultural backgrounds where that kind of giving isn't a norm, right? So there's a lot of cultures where that's just very unseemly. And the seed money, the kind of so-called, what is Emily's list is early money, is like yeast, right? The money that gets you going most often comes from your first circle. And if you don't have the ability to pick up the phone and get that kind of money, that's a real structural impediment. But being diminished, we saw Senator Perdue, soon hopefully not to be Senator Perdue in Georgia, calling Kamala Lala, at the podium the other day. I mean, there's a million microaggressions, right? A million small, but pernicious ways in which women of color are repeatedly diminished. And I think that what is transformative is when you kind of have a posse, when you have a squad, when there's enough of you in there together that you just don't have to deal with that stuff, or you do deal with it, but you have each other's back, And I think that's why it was important for us to sort of carry through. You said this earlier, running for office is one thing, being in governance is another thing altogether. And I think particularly for women like Rashida Tlaib, who, has found herself very much, not as much as Ilhan Omar, but very much in the crosshairs of this administration and the bile and hatred towards immigrants and Islamophobia and all the rest of it. And it's a tough thing, right? It's tough to cross that Rubicon and to have to do your work in a hostile environment like that every day. So I love what you were just saying about culture change inside your chamber. And, that's the sea change, right? And it comes very naturally when there's enough of us. When there's enough of us to claim power, then the rest just flows, right? And so really, that's why we all need to be activated. And not everyone's going to run for office, but every one of us can support the women who are, right? And support financially, do the work, show up, volunteer, put yard signs in the ground. All that is part of winning a campaign and changing a conversation.
It absolutely is. And the support networks are so important. Okay, let's see the clip of Bushra, whom Marjan just mentioned. She's the youngest candidate in the film.
This huge makeup fanatic, just because like it's a part of like Pakistani culture. It's something that's like always stuck with me, and I've definitely toned it down from like, I remember in my campaign video that I filmed, like the one where I was declining PAC money, you know, I just uploaded it and recorded it how you would any other video. But I got a message from a man, and he was saying, he's like, you know, loved the message, but next time you should probably try to wear a little less lipstick. And I was like, oh, so like, honestly, that stuck with me. I wear a lot less lipstick now, but I used to debate in high school. So I was the champion of the Harvard University debate tournament. My partner and I, we came in first place. And, you know, at the end of it, the judge, he came up to me and he was like, you know, I just wanted to let you know, like, I couldn't help myself, but I've never met a Muslim woman as articulate as yourself. And, you know, that just reminded me that before seeing me as Bushra the debater, he saw me as Bushra the Muslim first. I wish they would see that in Bushra the political candidate, or like Bushra the student, Bushra the person with fresh perspectives and ideas. Hold on. My mom is calling me.
I just love Bushra. I can't get enough Bushra in my life. I love Bushra.
I don't know who could.
She's fabulous.
Such an amazing leader. Clearly, I think, you know, it's probably a little bit of a deliberate surprise when she reveals that she's 19, and because she's
extraordinary,
extraordinarily poised and beautiful. But tell us about this scene, because it's really, I mean, it's gorgeous in its intimacy, in both what she's talking about and what she's doing. And this is a beautiful piece of filmmaking. I mean, you have a great subject, but you know, what did this scene mean to you?
What lovely questions. It's clear that you were trained at the hands of the BBC. I mean, it is really intimate, and I think that's one of the things that's really special about the kind of access that we were able to build while making this story. It was really important to us to see the full 360 version of these women, not just the women at the podium. And our crew, I'll just talk about that for a wee second. So I made this with my partner in crime, Grace Lee, and our producer, Jyoti Sarda, but there was no way, because of the nature of the timeline and the concurrent nature of elections, that we could cover all the stories. So we brought on a whole crew of colleagues, women of color, documentary filmmakers, and in each case we were really thoughtful about matching the person who was telling the story with the person whose story was being told. So in the case of Bushra, the team that was working with her was an Indian American director and a Pakistani American cinematographer, right? And actually, although the scene wasn't actually shot by him, it allowed an intimacy, a trust with us that really kind of melted away a bunch of that kind of more official stuff. But this scene is exactly that kind of microaggression that I'm talking about. Now, after she's seen this and we've discussed this at lots of panels, she wears as much with lipstick as she, wants to wear, as she should, right? But it's just such an example. In Bush's case, also so diminished for her age. I mean, constantly diminished. And that girl could run circles around me in terms of her intellect, right? There's no reason for her to be diminished because she was 19, she's 22 now. But I think that it's part of that stuff that we don't see. I mean, we don't, it's like a double-edged sword. At the same time, we never see men. I mean, this is an old adage, right? But whoever makes comment about, well, that's quite the pinstripe suit that Senator so-and-so is wearing today. Or, I mean, right? We don't have to waste time talking about those things. At the same time, I don't think it's possible to run as a woman without being judged on how you look. And you've got to, get your hair done and put on your lippy and, look decent. And those are all extra burdens, right? That women have to suffer in order to be allowed to show up at the starters line with everyone else, right? And so I think that this scene is really, it's about all of those things. And it's also about a young woman who hasn't yet fully embraced her power. Although I would say now, 3 years later, she's got it.
I'll bet. Bushra for president.
Totally. And I already have a long list of people who want to work on that campaign.
Yeah. Andrea, appearance, politics, do you want to talk about it? Or, I mean, sometimes it feels important.
Sure. It is a daily endeavor. And now we're on Zoom every day looking at ourselves instantly. It is, it's exhausting in certain regards, but you wonder that push-pull. I remember, and it is funny that she got a message from somebody, versus somebody confronting you to your face. And I think there's an interesting element of social media now that we're facing, where I remember when I first started running for office, and of course I'm a single woman, and wondering, where's your family? Where's your husband? Oh, this might be why not. And I was getting weird messages about things like that, about being high maintenance, or my focuses were clearly not about necessarily a family. Where those things lie about where, what you're doing is always subject to scrutiny. And that comes with your appearance. I too, like Bushra, was my family, my mom, culturally, you put lipstick on. Even when we were camping, I remember my grandma growing up saying, like, where's your makeup? You never know who you're going to meet in the woods. And I'm like, this is chaos. But at the same time, you enjoy it. We enjoy getting ready. Like Bushra, I loved that scene because part of even what we talk about is sometimes you so enjoy getting gussied up with your girlfriends and going out that sometimes the actual event is less fun than just getting ready. And so I've questioned too, who do I wear makeup for? Is it for myself? Is it for other people? And I think there's a push-pull, and I think there's a really interesting sort of dialogue. But again, we have to see ourselves to, recorded and subject to all that scrutiny. So we are, in a different place. And, one of the great sort of things that I had heard about Donald Trump was his destigmatizing makeup for men. And so I think there's something to be said about that. If there's one good thing, maybe to come.
I love it. This is a whole new angle I hadn't thought about in the last 3.9 years.
There you go.
And expensive hairstyles,
Exactly. There you go. So, if we're going to balance that out, I think that's all right. But it is definitely an imbalance.
So, Marjan, one of the things that is also striking is the different levels of races that you cover. And of course, we'd heard a lot about Stacey Abrams nationally. A lot of us were following that pretty closely. And Bushra is running for county commission. You have a couple state elections in there. Why is that? What do you see as the gamut of running, of thinking about, from county commission to governor? And beyond? Yeah.
I think that when we were thinking about what diversity meant for us, when we wanted to make this story of a movement, that was part of it, right? We also were interested in that kind of diversity of what kind of office you're running for, because everyone starts somewhere, right? And the act of doing it, and the act of standing up, sticking your head out above the turret, and trying to claim power to make your community better is the same, right? And albeit scaled in the case of Stacey Abrams' operation. So when we were thinking about who to follow, we wanted to think about geography. We wanted to think about ethnicity. We wanted to think about this idea of seats small to large, age and experience. But in all the cases, including even Bushra at her tender age of 19, these were women who had been working in movement somehow, right? Doing already the work in their communities. and that this idea of running for office, of stepping up and claiming political power, was an evolution of the work that they were already doing. So, and it's funny what you said, because Maria Elena Durazo, our state senator here in Los Angeles, she talks about her lippy sticky and how her mother said you can never leave your house without your lippy sticky, right? And I think part of wanting to have that spread was to be able to show the commonalities, you know, in this experience, but rooted in character. I have one dirty secret I'm going to share with you all, which is very good timing that we're doing this, which is that we actually followed Congresswoman Deb Haaland as well, from your fine state of New Mexico. And unfortunately, we weren't able to fit her into the series because we only had so much time, but we just this week released a short film about Deb Haaland. I'm going to drop it in the chat. It's 14 minutes and it follows her trajectory, and then of course all the Native women who are now on the ticket coming behind her, another series of historic firsts. So I'm going to put the YouTube link in the chat right now.
Oh, excellent. Let's do, it really is, the theme here is building power, and at all levels, and, you know, of course, women who are running for office are often stepping from local office into national office. But the power really is in community organizing, and, you know, the focus on getting out the vote and making sure that those who have a harder time voting, who are marginalized in the voting process. I mean, that was the cursing for me through the second half. But let's look at the Cam clip. Cam takes the voter to the polls, and you know, this is just one of those really sort of racist things of the way our systems work for names.
Bác ơi. Bác trai ơi. Cái cô kia cô không có ở nhà. Bác gái có muốn đi vào hôn với con, con dẫn đi bây giờ luôn.
Bây giờ bà muốn đi.
Bà ơi, bà con sẽ vô với bà rồi xong sẽ giúp bà từ đầu tới đuôi rồi xong trở về. Có ID theo rồi hả? Good. Dạ. Tốt. Bác muốn đi chơi vui không?
Đi ở nhà.
Ở nhà hả? Okay, all right. Come. Actually, I wanna check her registration before we go. Make sure she's. Bác ơi, cho con mượn cái ID của bác lại được không bác? Con muốn coi and I'm trying to help a voter vote, and I checked on her registration on the Secretary of State office, and it says to contact the county election board. So I'm calling to see what's going on with her right to vote. Well, her last name is Tran, Tran. Yeah. Why did that get flagged? Do you know? Oh, okay. Is it because of the exact match or something?
It could be too. Only because the first name I know of as NGOB, and then there's space, and then there's
Yeah, and right. Well, Vietnamese people usually have like, you know, 4 parts to their name. So her is like Ngọc Ánh Thị Tran, you know, and so we don't have necessarily a middle name, and then if you convert that over to English paperwork and form, you either end up jamming the first 2 names like Leanne together, or there's a space, and then it causes all kind of exact match issues.
So as we start to think about the call to action that we hope everyone who sees this, you know, gets very, very clearly, tell us about this frustrating part of the film where we see this incredible coalition coming together behind Stacey Abrams, the Asian community, Latinos, obviously the Black community, and unions, and it's extraordinary. It's wonderful. The workers. What happened there, and what do we take away from the fact that this incredible coalition came together, did amazing things, and yet Stacey Abrams is not the governor of Georgia?
Well, the first thing we take away is that voter suppression is real. It's not some made-up story. It's not some sour grapes excuse that candidates use when they didn't win. In the state of Georgia, in the past, these races have been decided by a margin of about 200 or 300,000 voters. In this case, it was decided ultimately by a margin of 53,000 voters. And at the same time, 55,000 voter registrations had been put on hold by the Secretary of State, who was actively, the chief elections officer running against her for governor. So while that situation isn't happening in this election in Georgia, if you've been watching the news, you've already seen day one of early voting in Georgia. People were in line for up to 12 hours. And this is after they've already spent millions of dollars investing in election infrastructure from 2018 till now, right? And at the same time, you see in episode 2 that if you just go to the slightly other side of town, where in the white neighborhoods, there are no lines at all, right? And what we try to unpack a little bit in episode 2 is, and Georgia is one of the most egregious states, but we shouldn't fool ourselves that this stuff doesn't happen everywhere. I live in super liberal Los Angeles, and 2 neighborhoods over, somebody put a burning piece of paper into the official ballot drop box to burn the ballots that had already been deposited there. So there are dark forces at play in some states, like the state of Georgia, unfortunately, and many others. There is a really sophisticated network system of suppression. I think that I went into this slightly naively. I'm a new American. I became an American in 2016 because I wanted to vote. I've lived here for 20 years, but I thought I should get off my arse and submit my naturalization paperwork in 2016, which I did. So the whole process is relatively new to me, but I've only ever been a voter in the state of California. And, I was agog, frankly, in Georgia. I come from Iran, where when they want to suppress your votes, they bundle up ballots into a suitcase and chuck them in a ditch somewhere, not super sophisticated. And what you see in Georgia is that still happens too. However, Nsé Ufot, one of the main organizers we follow in Georgia, she talks about suppression as suppression by 1,000 cuts. Right. So it's knocking off a couple of hundred people here, a couple of thousand people there. And it's like aggregating in the system, yoked together, where each one of the individual instances might not seem that egregious, but when you put them together in a network, you start to see it's a system by design. And frankly, our system, we know that the roots of democracy in this country were not made for any of the three of us, right? We weren't allowed. And by design, unfortunately, the system is meant to be slightly intimidating. It's meant to create this feeling. Actually, you were talking about it earlier, Andrea, right? Like I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know how this works. Busher talks about it in the film as well. And I think voters experience that all the time. And then if something happens to your ballot and it doesn't get counted, you think it's your fault. It's me. I screwed up. I didn't sign the thing right. I didn't put you don't understand that when they fill out that form, I mean, there's a scene at the end where they're chasing the ballots in Georgia. And, one of the things that they had done is where the date line right next to your signature line is for your date of birth. Now, every other form you ever sign, the date line that's next to your signature is for the date you signed that on that line, right? But in Georgia, that's for your date of birth, a fact that they already know about you since you're registered to vote. And so these are like small ways to just discount ballots, right? And in Georgia, we see this happening at scale with great sophistication, and we see it happening still now. And still, the resilience of voters, I mean, it literally gives me goosebumps. As I'm saying these words, I'm getting goosebumps. When I saw those photos from Monday, I guess it was, first day of early voting, and folks in line for 12 hours, most of them Black, the resilience of these people, the determination to show up in large numbers and not have this incredibly amazing privilege taken away from them is breathtaking, right? And I think that we are certainly in the gasps of a major power paradigm shift in this country. And I'm not talking left, right. I'm really talking brown, white, right? Like, I think that it's that demographic shift. And for some people that fills their heart with joy, people like me, I suspect people like you. And for others, it strikes real fear in their hearts. And so cheating becomes the mechanism to maintain power, because power never cedes. When does power ever just cede? I mean, right now we're talking about, like, is the person in the White House going to accept the outcomes of an election should they not go in his favor? So, voter suppression is something that we all have to be clued into this year more than ever. This is it's a real thing. All the stuff we've seen with the post office, there's just 100. The Harris County, Texas, where the Governor Abbott ruled that there should be one drop box for a county that's larger than many states. I mean, it's insane, right? It's insane, and it's not even clever anymore. It's not even hidden. It's just barefaced cheating, right? So I think that as soldiers for democracy, this is all of our problem. It's not my problem because it happens over there. It's my problem because I can't be free till we're all free, and I can't experience justice and thriving until everyone can experience justice and thriving. And this is the one place where we are equal. All of our votes count the same as one vote, right? So yeah, I would really encourage people to sort of, one of the things we wanted to do, you guys said you cried. We wanted you to feel emotion and sort of hope and inspiration, and we wanted you to feel rage. And we wanted you to feel those things in equal measure, because we can't take our eye off the ball. And even if this election goes in a different direction from what we currently have, it doesn't mean the game is over. It doesn't mean we get to, like, put up our feet and watch Real Housewives for the next 4 years. That's not how it works. It's a participatory sport, and our jobs as people, as citizens, is to own that we are the demos in democracy. We are the Paul in politics. We are the people, and it's our power. And there ain't nobody who's going to save us. Not even the best politician is a savior. It's our job to participate and to show up and to demand that our power, is seen. I'll get off my soapbox now.
That's it. It's a good one. Quote of the night, it's our power. And Vicky sent us a comment about speaking to voter suppression that we're seeing in early voting this year, which you touched upon. And I think there are some tips in the film, and would just love to go to that for a minute, news you can use. But, feeding people in line, driving folks to the polls, being there to advocate, support Get Out the Vote and voter drive organizations. What else?
I think in New Mexico, thankfully, we have a Secretary of State who cares so deeply about our democracy that we have such an extended early voting. I get a lot of questions about the safety of voting. What's the best way to give a ballot, especially now that so many people requested absentee ballots? Two things. I actually experimented myself by putting my ballot in the mail. It was there 24 hours later. Same with a friend in Albuquerque. We both said we believe that our Secretary of State trusts the mail system. Let's try it. Through our nmvote.org, you can follow your absentee ballot every step of the way. You can also go to an early voting site and hand deliver your ballot as well. And I know that a lot of folks in Texas, friends of mine that we're talking about in these areas, are so afraid to distribute it in a ballot distribution place that they're actually driving to the one polling station hundreds of miles away in order to ensure that their vote's counted, which should never be the case. And at least in New Mexico, there are many, many options. And thankfully, you can actually follow your ballot all the way. nmvote.org. I was able to check on whether or not my ballot was received by my county clerk's office. It was. We have so many ways to do that. So feel free to, I'll put my email in the chat as well for any questions that folks have about the safety, what's the best way. We have from now until Election Day, and I would recommend getting there early to make sure that your ballot's already in at your county clerk's office.
I mean, I'll just add, if I may, a couple of things. If it's not happening to you, it's going to be happening to somebody somewhere else in the country. So there are lots of organizations, say in Georgia, where they're literally delivering food to the lines and, helping people sort of stay warm in the lines. You can donate pizzas to the polls, help folks kind of, it's not a joke. If you show up at 10 in the morning and it's 10 at night and you're still standing there, you need to eat, So there's those kinds of actions, and also to really keep our eyes on the ball, like find the right Twitter accounts to be following if that's what you do, and just amplify what's actually happening, because the news media doesn't often dig into that kind of detail. And I think that one thing that's particularly keeping me up a bit at night about this election is we have had overt calls on the extreme right for, voter intimidation, essentially, at polling sites, right? And what we know is that the news loves that kind of stuff and chomps at the bit to show pictures of, dudes with tattoos and big guns and whatnot. And we need to have a robust counter narrative, right? So if you see people celebrating and supporting each other and coming out in peaceful protests, and those are also images that are really important to push out into the world, because otherwise we can get a very skewed opinion of what is happening. And, the one useful thing about social media is that it is a democracy of information sharing to some extent, unless the Facebook people get involved. And I think it's also really important for us to push back around those narratives, because the court of public opinion and narrative in the next 2 weeks up to the election, and probably 2-3 weeks after the election, is going to be game changing and super critical in this year's election.
One thing I'd say that I've seen that I like is just to not accept the idea that Donald Trump can decide whether to accept the results of the election. He can't.
Correct.
It's our power.
Correct.
And, that's been a news story that's been making me crazy. And I get why reporters keep asking, but in the end, I don't care whether he accepts or not. We need to support the people out there in Georgia doing the work to hold secretaries of state accountable for doing their jobs. And we need to know that we have a democracy and that it's not subject to his whim. And if he doesn't want to leave the White House, it's a building, fine. We'll deal with that later. But ultimately, he doesn't get to decide who the next president of the United States is. We do.
Yeah. No, I think it's absolutely right. And it's such a, can I say the word con in a non-partisan way? I don't know. I'm going to try. It's a con. It's a con that we don't have these powers, right? And our job is to be extra vigilant and extra alert. I found myself in my body kind of re-experiencing the feelings that I felt right after 2016, right? There's like an intensity of that feeling of chaos, that feeling of like a rapid fire misinformation and misdirection. It's like that same kind of apex is coming back at us now. And our job is to keep our feet planted on the ground and be following credible sources, and pushing back on this false narrative. Absolutely.
Another thing that's come up a couple of times that I just want to highlight is sort of that feeling of community and of support. And Andrea talked about it at the very beginning in terms of running for office and in terms of being in office, and how, as they changed the culture of the State House and will continue to, there has been a community to do that. And ultimately, that's what supporting voters one by one is, and elevating the narrative is, whether it's the Pueblos that Andrea works with in the district, and making sure that our Native American brothers and sisters know that just because they have been treated horribly in the past doesn't mean that they have no voice. They do have votes, and we hope that everybody out there is using them. And again, taking the time, the energy, the effort to support one or many people in the community in voting.
I think just one of the quick takeaways that I learned going through this process of running for office and being representative of our communities is how many more people want to participate. And I think that's what we underestimate when we see the fact that, no one ever expected anyone from our family or our neighborhood or our, community that looked like me, that grew up with me, that, to run, that it was so jarring that more people were involved and interested in the process, that I never expected that to be part of that. So the more that we see our communities reflected in the leadership that we have, the more participation there is, the more people are involved and informed. And I think that was an unintended consequence, but some of the better sort of situations that we never expected, that my family, my great great aunts, my uncles, my cousins out in other places around New Mexico that are now suddenly engaged because our family's engaged, because people who look like us are engaged. And it was just, that was an unintended consequence, but nevertheless, something that continues to transform our communities and democracy when more people participate. And I think that's what's so magical about where we get to live and what we get to do, and why I'm continually inspired by the folks that are participant to it.
I hope you run forever. So we're going to finish with a clip, and it strikes me this is a good one, but that opening sequence of the film is super powerful in its historical perspective of women of color stepping into power, taking power, fighting the fight, and realizing, honestly, it's an honor to be here with the two of you tonight. But of course, we all stand on the shoulders of some giants that have gone before and fought for years, decades, centuries, to bring power to people who have been oppressed. And there is a wonderful clip that, of course, features Stacey Abrams again, but also a real hero to some of this work through time who we lost this year. So why don't we play that last clip?
Ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together for Miss Oprah Winfrey. Georgia on my mind. Hello. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So here's the deal. I am an independent woman. I earned the right to be independent. And the women who just got the right, listen, it's not been 100 years. White women, listen to me. There was a time where you couldn't even own a piece of property without your daddy saying you could. And I have to say this to you, Black people with ancestors who never had the chance. When you sit at home and your friends sit at home and you don't get up and go vote, you disrespect your elders, you disregard your history, you disgrace their legacy. When you don't vote for what they were lynched for, discriminated against, humiliated for, and you can't get up and go vote, you dishonor your legacy. So earlier I asked you the question about what had prepared you. You came from parents who got you ready, who have been working in their own way for justice, equal rights, civil rights, your whole life. Yeah.
Absolutely. Robert and Carolyn Abrams are the most extraordinary people I've ever known.
Yes. I'm going to ask you again. Let's like this Oprah show. Oh. Here's your moment.
Oh, God.
I ask you, were you surprised about your daughter? Let's turn around so everybody can see you. Were you surprised that this is happening to your daughter?
No. I am not surprised. Stacey was born to be president.
Thank you very much. So what this must mean to you, being a representative from the state of Georgia and now seeing Stacey running for governor after all you've seen and known.
It make me cry.
Really?
To see a talent, charming, smart, young Black woman running for governor in the state of Georgia.
Georgia.
In Georgia. But many people in this state and other part of the South could not register to vote when they were asked to count the number of bubbles in a bar of soap and the number of jelly beans in a jar. And just, Stacey, go for it. Bring it home.
The great John Lewis. It's a movement, and it's got to keep going. Marjan, thank you for making such a powerful film.
Final for having me.
Thoughts from you? Call to action?
I mean, it's just one thing I learned from the organizers in this film, and I'm trying to remind myself hourly at the moment, is the elections are incredibly important, but they are not the be all and end all of anything. And the work ahead of us, the work towards justice is, immense, right? And so we put our hope in this election, we put our hope in every election, and we put our hope in politicians that we like. But in the end, the work is greater. And if we experience defeat, it doesn't mean the story is over. I think that Stacey is what a great example of that, right? I mean, in fact, folks following the Suppression beat, Fair Fight Action, which is her organization, has a lot of resources for how you can get involved. But if she is not the poster child for pick yourself up, dust yourself off, and keep on doing the work, then, I don't know what is. And on some level, we're all going to have to do that. A large portion of this country in a couple of weeks, maybe a few more than that, is going to feel great disappointment and great hopelessness. And it's just an election, and the work will continue before it, during it, and after it. And we all are part of that work. So, get involved. It's not going to get better unless we all get in the race. So I really appreciate you giving me this chance to talk with you all.
Andrea, final thought?
There's nothing. How do you conclude both with the filmmaker and the great John Lewis? This is about us. This is about the shoulders that we stood on to get to this point and to have this critical inflection point of this year and how we move forward. I think so many people were sort of checked out of a process before the earth just changed and shifted in such a remarkable way. And we know what that feels like. So if it's harder this time, then we know what it feels like and we know how to pick up and keep going. But if it's a part of an opening and an awakening that we get to have, then the work needs to be done. And even in this next 2 weeks, even New Mexico is making calls to swing states. There's still work to do in the next 2 weeks to call voters to see if they feel confident in their way of voting. And the work always continues, and I'm here for it. I know every single woman in this forum is here for it. And we'll do it together.
Yes, love you. Thank you for serving, Jason. Thank you for having us. It's been amazing. You're muted.
Someone had to. Somebody had to.
It had to happen.
Okay, let's try this again. It's an honor to be with you all here, and I so appreciate, of course, you being here, but all of the work that you've done over the years, and you inspire all of us. And I'm really, I shouldn't have played that clip last, because I watched it in the film, and then I watched it getting prepared, and I watched it, once more, and then again, and it gets me teary every time. So my voice will crack as I say goodbye to everybody. Go vote, please. And on Friday night, we have a sneak peek at a new Santa Fe original opera called Is This America? Based on the story of Fannie Lee Hamer, one of the great civil rights leaders who was underappreciated in her time. And our guests will include her grandniece, who will talk about her legacy, the librettist, the composer. So be here with us on Friday night. You can find the information on our website. And we will reassemble our wonderful crew of film lovers, Mara Fortes, a Mexican film scholar, the great Joan Tewksbury, a writer and director, and our own Paul Barnes, to talk about a classic political satire called The Fireman's Ball, a week from Friday. More coming in the living room, so tune in. And again, thank you, Marjan, Kate, and Andrea. Keep the fight up, and we'll see you guys in the living room soon.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much.
Bye.
Love you, Kate.
Bye.
Love you. Okay, you guys.